It is fun to be here. I mean this sincerely. It's being recorded. That's kind of dangerous, but I'll say it anyway. Every year, I'm lucky to do a handful of pro bono or low-fee type of events, and they're often my favorite because people who come to events like chamber events want to be there, want to make themselves better versions of themselves, want to make their teams and their businesses better, and that makes me happy. Very, very happy. So I've only got 15 minutes. I'll try and stay on script. When I think about leadership in a practical way that maybe you can use tomorrow to make yourself and your team a little different, well, I thought of three things in particular I would share today, and I'm going to do it in story form, kind of a mini keynote, if you will. And stories are, I hope that's one of the things you take away, as I know we've got a pastor in the room. Stories are amazing for teaching, just amazing. I've never found a vehicle that's better, and that's why I tell stories for a living. So when I think about leadership, my favorite slice of that pie, by far, for the last 5-8 years, give or take, is authenticity, which you've been sharing some ideas about this morning. And here's why I care about that, because I've been inside of, well, over 1,000 companies doing different things at different times. And what I witness is hilarious. I watch men and women act every day. Act, which is funny because none of them were trained to be actors. None of them. But we like to manage impressions, and we do that so much because we've been sold this, I think it's a lie, to be honest with you. Professional us should be over here, personal us over here. Work, life, never shall the two meet. And I think that's actually unproductive. I'm not saying you're supposed to bring all your problems to work. I'm not saying you're supposed to be best friends with everyone that you work with. I am saying that if you want to maximize what you and your team are capable of, you absolutely positively better be more than just a professional. They need to know the person as well. So authenticity matters a great deal to me. What the logic and the science says is that people crave to connect, and we very often fail to feed that craving with real rapport, real human relationships, and we rely instead on more distant professional credentials as something that we think we should hide behind more than we probably should. My journey towards authenticity as an individual began in earnest in Matamoros, Mexico. You ever been there? Mm-hmm. Not too far from here. Not necessarily a vacation destination. I'm sure you probably agree. I was there doing some work years ago with a little firm called Anderson, now Accenture, and my boss teed me up one day, gave me an opportunity. You think back in your career to that first time someone gave you a chance to really hit a home run and make a mark. This was it for me as a young 20-something. He said, you see that machine, and it was as big as half of this room. He said, well, it takes about 3 to 4 hours on average to change that over, so it stops making that product and it's capable of making this one. I want you to go change it over. Get that changeover down to maybe minutes instead of hours if you can go. Gave me a team, gave me a camera. We got a little lucky and maybe we're a little smart, and we did, in fact, deliver what looked like my first home run ever as a professional. We got that thing down to about 4 minutes on average, which was spectacular. My boss is grinning, happy I'm on the team for the first time. My client not thinking about my hourly fees for the first time. Very happy that I was in there tinkering around. I got back to the office weeks later, and I knew the promotion schedule, and I knew that conversation was coming with my boss, and I knew they were going to promote me and coordinate me as that young up-and-comer. I was very excited because I just hit this home run. Sitting there one day, phone rings, it's the boss. Hey, would you come down to my office? And I grinned, knowing we're going to have that conversation. And so I said yes, and I hung up the phone, grinning like an idiot, and I went down the hallway to his office and walked in. And he said, hey, would you shut the door? And I thought to myself, of course I'll shut the door. We don't want the entire office listening to him tell me how great I am. So I shut the door. And then I sat down, ready to have what I thought was going to be one of my most memorable professional discussions to date. And then he looked at me and he said something unexpected that I will never forget. He said, what in the heck is on your arm? And he looked very upset. And he pointed to this, which is a snake. And I was not ready for this conversation. I had absolutely no idea where this was going. We're supposed to be talking about my awesome work, not my awesome ink. And I was flummoxed, and I just looked at him and said, well, that's a snake. He was unimpressed with my answer, and he said, listen carefully, I don't care what that is. What I care about is the client saw it. The client questioned the quality of the talent we hire because you're not bright enough to know better. You got to cover those things up in a professional environment. I do not ever want to see those at a client side again. I do not ever want to see them in this office if you want any future in this company. Do you understand? And I'm a fairly tough guy. I wanted to stand up and defend myself. Let's talk about my work, my character, anything other than what you're talking about. And I didn't do that. I just sat there and I looked at him. And I kind of folded and I said, yes, sir, of course, yes, sir. Not my favorite moment. About 10 years later, I'm on the back end of a career as a professor that I love, front end of a career, speaking and writing for a living, that I love even more. And I got up one day, very jacked up, because I was going to do 3 things I love. Go to class and teach a bunch of graduate students, go to a corporation, get on stage, tell some stories, and then go see an old friend I haven't seen since high school coming through town for lunch. And when I got ready to go to class, I put on a very expensive, well-tailored suit coat right over my blue jeans. It looked all professional. I learned my lesson when that guy killed me so many years ago in that conversation, and boy, I always wore that jacket. And it was just so nice. I went to class, they took me seriously. I think partially because I looked the part. I went to the corporation, got on stage, told some stories, still wearing a jacket. They took me serious again, no doubt partially because I looked the part. And then thankfully, my favorite part of the day, I went across town, walked into a restaurant, and I saw this woman, her name's Kim. Haven't seen her in a long time since high school. You might have friends at work, and sometimes that can be a useful thing, but this is someone I knew back in the day. Think about who you knew in high school. They know all the stupid things that you did. You can't posture in front of them. And I hugged, and we sat down and started talking about family, and it wasn't 5 minutes before I caught her oddly staring at the lapel right here. I assumed I had some food or something on my jacket, and I looked down, there's nothing there. And I said, "Why are you staring at my jacket?" And she just kind of was excited that I finally said that. And she goes, "Well, I'm glad you asked. You know what? You know and I know that you're just about the most casual guy walking around the face of planet Earth. When did you decide to grow up and start wearing adult clothing?" Which was funny and honest. And I said, "I'll tell you." And I gave her the whole story about how years ago that boss ripped me and what he taught me. And she kindly listened. And when I was done, she said, "Well, maybe that was good advice for you then. Maybe. But I'm not sure it is anymore." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, the world's changed a lot over time. You've changed a ton over time. I don't think that's the best advice." I just kind of let go and said, "Okay, give it to me. What's your advice?" And she said, "Well, I'll tell you what you should do. You should take off that ridiculously overpriced, spiffy-looking jacket, roll up your sleeves, and intentionally show your ink." And I thought in the moment that sounded a little reckless, because I know corporate America and they can be pretty conservative. And I told her that. She said, no, this is going to work for you. Listen to me, it's going to work for you. You know why? And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Man, don't ever forget this. People like real." Some of the best advice I've ever received in my life. As a scholar, I knew it to be true. As a person, I needed this woman to throw it in my face so that I could consider how I should be living it better. And I marinated on that for a while. And eventually I thought she was right. I took the jacket off. I've been rolling up my sleeves ever since. And I'm building a heck of a nice brand helping people get a little more comfortable in their own skin, whatever their version of authenticity might be. So I'll ask you, I know some people think ink is very interesting. Other people think it's an abomination. I don't care personally, because for me it's just a hook, a way to get people to open their brains up and think about whether or not they're living as honestly as possible and why that might be useful instead of managing impressions full time. But I'll ask you anyway. How many of you, small group, might be 0. Anybody in here going to admit they got at least one tattoo? Look at these heathens. I love it. All right. I used to follow that bit. I started telling this story maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I used to follow that bit by saying, "Wonderful. See all those hands? All you people with your hands raised, do it with me. Show your ink." I don't do that anymore.
They were too real.
I was in St. Louis one night, corporate gig, 1,000 people in the room. I'm telling stories. Open bar. And I said, "Everyone do it with me, show your ink." And a whole bunch of people showed too much skin that night. And my client was none too happy with me. I don't do that anymore. I just tell the story, and I like to remind people that being a little bit more personal to go with the impressive professional that you are is a wonderful elixir, and it's free if you remember to use it. Wonderful. First idea, authenticity. Important, underused, free, useful stuff. Second idea involves a little company called State Farm. First thing I'll tell you about State Farm, where's that little piece of paper with my picture on it? Can I see that real quick? When State Farm,
On the back.
there it is. This bike doesn't exist in my life anymore. It was stolen from a parking garage in Houston, Texas. And State Farm treated me very, very well. Quickly gave me what I thought was a above average fee, market fee for that bike. They treated me very well on a few other instances as well. And they mean a lot to me. Here's why they mean the most to me. When I think about authenticity and you bonding with your coach, I think about your comments, not wanting to be anything other than that lighthouse. I love the lighthouse. They'll believe in that lighthouse even more if on occasion you'll let yourself be vulnerable. If they know, I'm not talking about every day, I'm talking about 2-3 times a year, let's be very clear. If they know about your obvious imperfections, learning moments, screw-ups, and mistakes, if they know a little about that, it's not that they're going to look at you as less than normal. Most leaders think that they can't ever talk about these things, and that is wrong. You absolutely, positively must talk about them at least a little to people that matter each year. Not all the time, that gets into the danger zone, but a worse error by far is never saying anything about them. My favorite failure story ever is the State Farm story. I got a call, this is 13 years ago maybe, I got a call, it was some big mucky-muck at corporate from State Farm, and I thought to myself, I have arrived, look at me, I know I'm a good professor, but now maybe this speaking thing's going to work, right? Hey, we got an event, we want you, we saw your site, got the book, let's do this. And he said, well, here's the date, are you available? And I looked at my planner and there's nothing in it. And I said, yeah, I think I can fit you in. And we had a great conversation, and I was feeling way full of myself. We've all been there, and at the end of the conversation, like a rookie, I still hadn't talked about my fee. And he goes, well, wait a minute, we haven't talked about your fee. Now look, Todd, I can't pay you more than, and he threw out a number, and that number was bigger than any number anyone had ever thrown at me before. And he said, do you think you can live with that? And I said, I'll try. I went to the gig many months later. I walked into a large hotel ballroom. I found the table where all the executives were seated, and they treated me like somebody. And it felt good, maybe in a dangerous way. It felt really wonderful. And then they had a lot of firsts that day. First big stage, lights, cameras, flowery introduction. A lot of fun. I'm thinking this speaking thing might be a real thing. I'm loving this. I took the stage after the introduction. Crazy applause, which is always weird because you've never done anything and they just applaud for you, assuming you're going to be good. You guys did it this morning. Anyhow, I take the stage. I'm thinking to myself as I look at them, the applause is dying, music's dying. This is one of my favorite moments. I'm thinking, holy cow, it's fun to be here. Let's do this. And then I opened my mouth, and things changed rapidly. And I proceeded to be absolutely, positively mediocre, just a step or two ahead of a train wreck, to be honest with you. I thought I knew what a keynote was. I did not. I knew what training environments looked like. That's not what a keynote is. But I stood there, sounding like a professor. That's not good. I was using 3- and 4-syllable words because I can. And everyone hated it. And my slides were packed. You needed a magnifying glass to see the things I put on those stupid slides. You'll notice I don't use slides anymore. I stood there acting this way. I even turned around a lot and read slides. You've seen someone do that? I did everything you're not supposed to do. I did it all in 5 minutes. I looked down the audience and they were disengaged. Absolutely disengaged, talking to their neighbors, looking at their watches. And I looked at my watch and I got 15 minutes to go. And I had no clue how to write this train wreck. And so I continued to be a blabbermouth professor, impressing no one. And when I was done, they gave me the most insincere golf clap you have ever heard. I left the stage and an executive handed me a check and he said, thank you, and he did not mean it. When I felt guilty that day, I mean, not guilty enough to give the check back, okay? But I felt very guilty. You ever screwed up professionally and somehow you literally, physically feel smaller? I was having that feeling. I get in a car, 2-hour drive back to where I was living at the time, and I'm feeling barely big enough to look over that steering wheel out to the road, sitting on what my mom called the pity pot. You ever heard that? Sitting on the pity pot, feeling sorry for myself. I flashed back to a time in high school. I just lost a basketball game with the high school team. She saw my long face and she stopped and looked at me and said, you're sitting there on the pity pot, aren't you? Yes. She said, well, here, you know what? Everyone finds themselves sitting there at some point in time. That doesn't make you special. What might make you special is what you choose to do about it. Here's my advice. This is brilliant. Measure it in hours, not days or weeks. Give yourself a deadline. Hours, not days or weeks. You're going to choose to stand up off of that pity pot, articulate something you can learn about this situation so that maybe you won't find yourself sitting there very quickly in the future. That's my advice. She locked off. I'm driving home, 2 inches tall. I remember that advice. Good stuff. I looked at my watch, gave me 30 minutes. Took about 15 to 20 mentally. Thankfully, I stood up off of that woe is me, why don't they love me pity pot. And I realized something. You know what? If I want to do this speaking thing and not give it up, because that day I felt like giving it up. I did not think it could be a vocation, which it is today. I thought, I'm so happy I have tenure. I love being a professor. But if I want to do this, I need to study. I lived in the world that has the internet. Right before YouTube, there was still video everywhere, and I knew that, and I thought about it, and I went home and I started searching, and I watched video of the best speakers ever captured on video in history. Politicians, men, women, sports stars, people from religion, from politics. It was amazing, the people that I watched and what I learned as a scholar who's really good at watching, learning, and dissecting. I did that. I remember being particularly impressed by one guy. His name's Bill Clinton. I do not like the left or the right, for those who care. I'm not very political. I find flaws in both. But when I see a good speaker, period, period. No matter where they come from, I always pay attention, and that's intriguing to me, and even his detractors believe he was one of the best speechifiers ever. He looked into a camera, you might recall, with a straight face, very believable, and told the world, I did not have relations with that woman. Most of the people watching went, I guess he didn't do it. That's the power of amazing communication, and I was blown away by that, and I continued learning, and I adopted things that they taught me. Every single gig after gig, I took a step forward, fast forward. It is a full-time job, one I love. No one gives me unearned golf claps anymore, and the only reason I get to do this for a living is because I was lucky to fall on my face in front of 500 senior leaders at State Farm some 13 plus years ago and choose to make that a catalyst instead of a source of embarrassment. That's a choice. We all know that. Life's a series of choices. You want people to believe in you, you can be that light. You also, a little bit, now and again, absolutely have to show your humanity, which means the screw-ups and the setbacks just as much or more than the accolades and the accomplishments. That makes you complete, and yet we fail to share that with them. Isn't that strange? I hope you'll do that. Last idea, last story. I haven't been watching. Can I get one more in? Sure. Thank you. Over here, one of you said something about being popular, wanting to be liked. And I started to think, this is going to be the worst talk I've ever given because they know everything I'd like to share. You're so right to share that. It's amazing. Kids feel social pressures. Where's my parents? We worry about our kids, sex, drugs, rock and roll, all kinds of weird things that might happen to them in this world that we are fearful of. But man, you're so right. It happens to adults every bit as much as kids. They go to work and want to please people. They want to be liked. They want to be in the good graces of people who matter or people they like. And that often leads to suboptimal decision making. Absolutely. It goes like this. I know the best option is A over here. I'm going to go with B, though, because it's a good enough answer to whatever this problem is. And it's not going to offend that group. They're going to love it. They'll probably be okay with it. And overall, it would have maximized how these people who are impacted feel about me. That is a prescription for horrifying decisions long term. It will never make you what you would like to become. I love to remind people popularity is fleeting, it's fickle, it's a myth, it comes, it goes. What's always best, of course, is making the right call, executing with integrity, earning the one thing long-term always better than being well-liked, which is respected. I learned many years ago how good people will turn on you, drop of a dime, if they don't like something that you've done for an hour or a day or a week, who knows. If they don't like you. True story, I'm working for Ernst & Young back in the day. Me and my boss getting on an airplane, going to the same flight every week. He's in front of me. I don't know, that protocol suggests he should be. I don't know. We get on this jumbo jet, hundreds of people, and he stops every week, same routine, right there by his seat in first class. And then he would grin, invariably, as he looked my way, knowing I wasn't at his career stage and I couldn't stay there in that coveted area. I had to keep walking through that arrogant partition that the airline has created only to make sure you know that you are leaving the promised land and walking into the great unwashed. My boss thought that was funny. I did not. I have to ask you, in your life so far, anyone here not yet had the opportunity to sit in first class? Okay, a couple of hands. I can tell you something, really honestly.
It's cool.
It's a different world in first class. I have graduated to first class. I am 6'4", too much, and I need room. And they have leg room. They have this room. They got leather. They got dedicated staff. They got okay menus, decent scotch. It's a different world in first class. Didn't know that back then. I just knew my boss was kind of a schmuck and liked to make fun of me as I walked past him. So I did that. I walked past him. But the day in question, it didn't bother me because I had a seat in the bulkhead row that day. That is that front row of the cheap seats that very often has leg room for days. Close as I ever thought I'd get to first class. I got the one by the window, 3 seats. I'm so happy I'm doing this. I rarely get to do this on an airplane. Let him make his jokes. I don't care. Reading a book. Going to be a great flight. Now, I found out what happened later. This was before 9/11. Does everybody remember life before 9/11? Life's a little different before 9/11. Life on airplanes in moments was way different before 9/11. I'm sitting there reading my book. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the next cat walking through that arrogant partition. I look up, I see the gun, the badge, the insignia. That's a U.S. Marshal. He's doing this as he pulls the next guy through that partition. That guy's wearing orange head to toe and restraints. Where do you think they sat? True story. To this day, I don't understand why. the marshal did not choose to sit between me and the guy in the orange. I'm rubbing elbows with him. I'm reading the book. I'm trying to act like it's normal. It's anything but normal. I'm very nervous. You know you're nervous when you say to yourself, did I just read that paragraph 10 times? But I am curious. I had to look, so I looked at this guy. I'm not making this up. He's looking at my book. What do you do with that? What's the protocol? Do you ask him before you turn the page? Very nervous. I was bothered, which is a rare condition for me. I wanted to get out of here. Now, I found out later what happened. My boss is sitting up there in first class, and he saw that this thing had just happened. And he also saw there was one unsold seat, a no-show of some sort, in first class. And because things were so different back in the day, they had the right conversations real quick, resulting in the lead flight attendant walking through that partition, bending over the marshal and the guy in the orange and saying to me, "Sir, I apologize for the delay, but your spot in first class is now ready." I said, yeah. And I grabbed my stuff and I did that weird thing where you try to walk by him and not touch him, you know. And I'm standing there right in the middle of that partition. I'm about to walk into the promised land of cushy leather seats. But I stopped because I thought I should say goodbye to all the people still captive back there. Now, 5 minutes earlier, when I took a look back in that cabin, I saw people I had never met before in my life. You ever seen this? People that say nothing with words but with their bodies and their faces scream volumes. When they first saw that guy sit down next to me, I looked at them and they were all looking at me like, hang in there, man. And then finally, I got my escape and I got to go to first class. I'm standing there about to leave. I turned around one more time and I looked at him. What do you think I saw this time? Only took about 10 seconds for their view of me to flip on its head. They now looked at me with laser-like precision, looks of disgust and betrayal. How dare you leave us back here with that man? So what? Sometimes they're going to love you. Sometimes they're not. And it doesn't matter as long as you're making the best call you can for yourself and your team, executing with integrity, earning long-term the thing always better than, of course, being popular, which is respect. A lot of people I know who have a chance to talk to you or maybe give you something they've written often get complex in silly ways when they think about leadership and building your team. I like to keep it very, very, very simple because you're so busy, simple is useful if you want to focus on it tomorrow and make things a little bit better. So I hope you'll remember why authenticity matters. I hope you'll remember what State Farm taught me and how you can use it because you've got State Farm stories. I know you do. And I want you to remember what those people on the plane taught me. You do that, I think you'll take a step forward and be an even better version of yourself tomorrow. At least that's my hope. Thanks for being here today.